Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. This is the day after Christmas, Thursday, December 26th, um, 2024. So, we had a really good Christmas here, which I want to talk about just briefly. And my wife and I watched the Enigma Netflix documentary about Aaron Rodgers, which is interesting. I have a few thoughts about that. Maybe there's a comment I want to get to, and then I have a bunch of funny things. I think I have a bunch of funny things already to cover. I don't know what kind of news day it is going to be today. But in terms of Christmas, the reason I'm talking about here, I'm not a holiday person anymore. Like when my kids are, kids are grown, they're older, and like I just, and I want to talk about this a little bit with the Aaron Rodgers thing as well, because there are things that are in our society that people pretend to care about, but it's because they have nothing else going on in their lives, right? And when you're lost and you don't have any goals and you're not focused and you're disconnected, you end up focusing on the things that, are not all that important to you, but you make them important. And and there's a group mentality. Holidays are one of those things, right? The holidays have lost their meaning, but like when you don't have anything going on, you focus on these things, hoping that it'll be something special happens, right? Because if you're miserable and your life sucks and you're walking through life in a daze, you have these moments. You're hoping like this thing will be, like big deal. New Year's Eve coming up, and then these other holidays and whatever they might be, because you have, you're in a depressed state or whatever it is, which is the case for a lot of people. There's some, this sort of NPC mentality almost would be the way to think about it. And I'll get back to that when we get to Aaron Rodgers. But let's go with Christmas. So my wife and I have not been doing anything really. Christmas has been getting lesser and lesser. And last Christmas we were driving. And it was just kind of the whole thing was a burden doing anything. My kids just don't. No one cares about it anymore. For the most part, like it's not like little kids who look forward to Christmas and the whole thing. And so I don't know why we just started to feel Christmas more this year. Like it happened organically. There wasn't any intention. And everything just sort of flowed. It was like a great day. Like you can have a person's days, like you have the days where just are normal days. Like just there's nothing special, nothing great, nothing bad. They're just, whatever you feel. Like you're a happy person and things are going your way and you feel good and you're connected, whatever it might be. You're feeling positive about your direction of your life. You're not, there's nothing niggling at you, nagging at you. There's no, thing that you wish you could be doing or should be doing. You feel like you're just doing the right thing, which has not always been the case in my life, obviously, but like right now it is. But whether you're like in a bad state where you're just in a, if I was in 18 years of bad marriage, right? In that whole period of my life, and then there's other periods I had that were bad periods, and then the good periods or whatever where you're feeling happy or good or on a regular basis. There's just a lot of days that are like checking the box. You go through your routine, you do what you're supposed to do. There's nothing significant that happens, and there's some days like the car breaks down or you get sick or there's a bad news or a loved one dies. There's just there's just special days that they're just like, well, this is not a normal day and it's bad, right? At least you experience it as being bad. Undesirable things happen, right? On a spiritual level, it's something else, but on a material level, on an ego level, it's a bad disappointment, lose your job, get hurt, whatever. Something happens that like is, out of the ordinary and it's not desirable. And it might go on for a while. It might be a problem that you're dealing with for an extended period of time where you're stressed out, whatever, relationship, ending, divorce, something, long period where you're going through something. And then there are the good days, the days that just everything flows, you feel happy. Once in a while, like you'll be going through a dark period and you'll have just a really good day, like a happy day in the middle of that, or you're having You're in a good period where you feel happy, you feel everything's going the way it should be, and then you have a couple of bad days or a bad day. But those days are like they're not controllable. They just happen. Things happen, good, bad, and sometimes they coincide with a holiday or a birthday. Like these are supposed to be special days. People have their holidays they look forward to, but it's not guaranteed you're going to feel happy on that day. You're going to feel good on that day. The things are going to flow, right? And if they're putting a lot of importance on those days, then they end up being a shitty day. Then you're just, I mean, it just sucks, right? Because you're really looking forward to it, and oftentimes those days are just normal days, a holiday, and you put so much effort and emphasis into it. It's like you put a lot of energy into the Super Bowl. People have Super Bowl parties. It's a holiday in itself. These things, and the game sucks, and so the ads suck. Right? It's a disappointment. It's a letdown. It almost always is because people put too much pressure on it being better than it should be or it could be, or they put more into it than it really is able to give back to you, right? In terms of your expectations. But anyways, my wife and I are both kind of feeling Christmas a little bit more this year, and I have really got the sous vide times down. We bought a couple of turkeys from Whole Foods on Thanksgiving, so we had frozen, to have backup food and things. And so I cooked a turkey, and the last one I cooked was, I figured out a really good way of doing it in the sous vide. A sous vide is a slow cook in a water bath, and it's really been, I've really into it, like in terms of cooking any sort of meats or anything like that. And I make the mashed potatoes and gravy. My wife makes a cranberry pie, which is really great, and she makes uh, this pumpkin with stuffing in it. And so it's not a lot of work for us. Like I start cooking the turkey the day before, so that's like out of the way. It's in the it's ready to go. It's in these sous vide bags, and then I my wife was gonna do stuffing. She's like, no one likes the stuffing. I'm like, well, I had a stuffing. I don't like stuffing, but I made the stuffing years ago when my family and I had a chestnut tree, and I wanted to find ways to use chestnuts. So I invented this stuffing recipe, and like I know more about cooking now, and so I kind of remembered the basics of the recipe, and I made it, and it was freaking amazing. Like it was just because I added certain things to it. Now, of course, we put that umami and everything, which just seems to make everything better without really affecting the flavor. Just like some kind of thing that makes stimulates. I don't know what it is, but it's just great, and so especially anything savory. And I put these other things in it, apples and these other things, and it was freaking amazing. My wife and I were just sitting there eating it because I remembered it being good. But I got these chestnuts from the store, and you don't need many of them. Like they're kind of a pain to cook. They're hard to you got to cut them, and there's just they're not in a hard shell, but they're not great. Peeling out, getting them out, and I remembered all these things. Like I'm not a labor intensive person for all these things, but these chestnuts were a lot better than the ones we had in our tree. They were like twice the size. We had one year we got these chestnuts and we started using them for different things. The kids liked them. We roasted some, and they're an interesting Chinese chestnut. The American chestnut got this disease, the Dutch elm disease, I think it's called, and there's these massive chestnut trees that were here in America. They were massive. Kind of like a huge trees, thick trees. I mean, the whole economies were built on these things. Everyone's using chestnut wood. But this disease got brought over, and now all those trees are wiped out, all the American chestnuts. But they still are alive. We saw one at the Blue Ridge Parkway, this old massive tree that had sort of rotted out. And it would grow. It'd have a tree that would grow to about 20 feet high, and then it would get sick and die. So the roots were alive, but it just kept on dying off and then putting up another tree, and kind of sad thing. But they bring in these Chinese chestnut trees, and these chestnuts were massive compared to the ones we had in our yard. These ones that we get in the store. But we had these chestnuts. The kids used to gather them, and I figured out some recipes, and one of this was the stuffing. And then my wife was going to make a bean casserole, green bean casserole, and we didn't have any soup, and there's no stores open. She uses like mushroom soup, and I said, well, there was this time I went to a Chinese restaurant. My best friend from high school. I moved down to Atlanta, and his stepdad and his stepmom brought us out to dinner. Like I had just been there like a week or so, and I kind of just knew them a little bit. Like I had met his mom, I think like once. Somehow I got invited to this thing. It was kind of odd. And they went to this Chinese restaurant. It was like the best Chinese food I ever had, except for this place in Amherst. There's a guy who does organic Chinese food in Amherst, Massachusetts. It's like a renowned, like sort of a like a celebrated restaurant and things. He grows his own vegetables, and it's amazing. But this place was, like like really good food. This other place in Atlanta, and they had these ginger beans. They had like ginger and garlic in them. And my wife looked up the recipe and made them, and they were amazing. And like so, we had this stuff that everything was like easy and good, and everything turned out better than like for Thanksgiving. And we had bought a lot of these different lights things. Like we had a lot of we have this cube now that glows and like this stuff, and there's good atmosphere, and it was just like it was really felt good that day, right? Um, and I was, I mean, I'm always aware now. This past year, there's been this nostalgia thing. I'm going to read the prophecies from the Whispers of the Brighter World, and there's supposed to be a big event that happens this coming year. Like I don't know if it's a part of it, but I've been thinking about the past. I've had some dreams about the past. I looked a bunch of people up from high school on social media, and I just don't care about that. Like by high school, I was in a daze. I was in a Rahu period. I never think about it. Like it's not something I'm, focused on at all. Like it didn't really mean that much to me. But I talked about this how one of the like Facebook recommended this high school person, and I thought about these people, and I started seeing that they had whatever friends and people that I went to high school with, and I looked up a number of them, and just was this weird thing that never happens. I'm not sentimental, and there's nothing there, but like I was seeing how old they are, like all these people, I could kind of see the person they used to be. Some of them, like there wasn't much memory of it, right? But like just this sense of, I know my family. I mean, everyone's old now. My nephews and nieces are now retired. Their kids are grown, right? Like it's just everybody's old in my family. Like the people I knew to be people younger than me, people older than me, right? They're my siblings are, my sister has cancer, and my brothers, they're just all, in the death process, right? My brother's 17 years older than me, and these things, and so a number of people who were in my high school have already died, who are in my graduating class. Like you get into this kind of time in your life, but I just had this nostalgic feeling. I've been watching old sporting things like 30 for 30 on ESPN, some of these things that I remembered, and they were just I'm kind of detached from all these things. Like I don't have as much connection, and things like this that people have, like things in my what I would consider a past life in this life, the things that were a different season in my life, they're gone, and I don't reminisce about it. My family, things that meant so much to me, especially my kids, and when they were young, and like they were having this intergenerational family farm, and it just had to let it all go. But then all of a sudden I had this brief period where I felt like my life was passing before my eyes. So maybe something specific for me, but I think other people have said that they're going through similar things. But we had this really good Christmas, like just it was raining, and it was nice because we went on some walks. It was like slow rain, and then it was like a heavier rain. But if it hadn't rained, if it was colder, we would have had this snow. That would have been the only thing that made it like a more sort of traditional Christmas. But it was a great day. It just felt like kind of was great. And my wife and I watched the Aaron Rodgers Enigma, and on the downside for Aaron Rodgers, it's a little bit, I don't want to call it pretentious. You know, I mean, I think he's a sincere person about his spiritual journey. There are a few things in there that I don't, necessarily. I mean, some of it's just a little bit self-involved because it's a new age exploration, right? But having said that, like to his credit, he's a true spiritual seeker, right? Like he's, somebody who, I mean, his story was this. He won a Super Bowl in 2010, and they were like a wild card team. They were, and he was like someone who hadn't won any playoff games, right? So it was like there's this knock against him. And they win the Super Bowl, and he's like, well, now what, right? And so, that's a sign of a spiritual person because there is accomplishments that you have. And when those accomplishments, you work really hard for something, and you're like, well, that's not this isn't as good as I thought it was going to be. You could have the a goal, and you can achieve that goal in epic fashion in your life. Like you can have these moments, and when you have those moments, and you're like, wow, this isn't. Is this it? Right? It's like the is this it syndrome for spiritual people. That no matter what you achieve in material life, it's never going to be your real true goal. It's not the real thing. And if you've had some sort of past life experiences where you've already done these things, right? Because like you need to, when a soul incarnates, it needs a number of lives to find its true purpose. And sometimes it doesn't happen at all because people just ego hijacks a person's life, right? But for a spiritual person, when you're ready to embark on your spiritual journey, and that's like the true starting point, right? So it's, just everything else is like a preliminary, like you just got to go through all these phases. Like you incarnate in, and you're usually poor and miserable, and you look at these rich people and these powerful people, and you're like, oh, if I was one of them, my life would be better. If I was famous, if I was, whatever it is, right? Um, I would be, happy. And then you become that, and you're like, well, I'm even more miserable now. Like, you don't really know your past life, but there was you incarnate in with this idea that, that this samskara, this something you've taken from a past life that in the next life you need to be rich and powerful and something like this, right? Whatever it was that some kind of thing that you envied. The grass is always greener, then you realize you're not happy. And then it's like, well, what then? Like, then what's my purpose? And so that's the question that, people have to ask. And then they embark on a spiritual journey. And sometimes they're like, well, this isn't great because it's so hard. And, the spiritual journey is a lot longer. And, but it starts off with this idea. And Aaron Rodgers is flirting with this idea, right? And I don't know if as he gets older, it'll move to something different because he says that when people say everything happens for a reason, he didn't understand it. And the problem with the New Age movement, and the problem with what Aaron Rodgers is doing, they're doing spiritual things to benefit their material life. When I talk about Sajmarg meditation, what I used to say heartfulness before I knew it was a cult and all these things, right? What thing, Daji had wrecked with Sajmarg, and now we're doing the Gratefullness meditation. For people who are coming in, and I don't really talk about this, but it's there. I would say, well, you're getting a good night's sleep. You do the cleaning, you have these sittings, and all of a sudden, if you were not sleeping well, you start sleeping well. Like that's just, some of the things that happen for people. And, your stress level is going to be better, and you're going to do your job better. Like in terms of if this thing works for you. Like it's not working for everybody, but these are ways to evaluate how this thing is beneficial, right? Like why would somebody do this meditation? Well, these are some of the side effects. I'm much better at this job. Like it helps me do this job. It helps me do everything. Like I was a very incompetent person and I was missing things. I just couldn't, there's things that I needed inside of me that I just didn't have to get through things, to be in relationships, to hold jobs, whatever. Like I just was, and I didn't have like motivation and things for, that's the other part when you become someone on the spiritual path, like the things don't mean the same thing to you, which I'll get more into in a bit. And so it just helped me do the things I needed to do. It helped me be, a better person. And of course, being more loving and things like that. These are the higher end things of the specific size mark practice. But none of those things are the reason to do it. The reason to do it is because it's a spiritual. You have a spiritual goal. But most people can't even hear that because they just want to. They want to have something that's going to help them live their life. They want something to enhance their life, make their life more pleasurable, make their life less stressful. Right? That's how people view any kind of situation. Is this going to help my material life? And that's a very new age Oprah Winfrey type attitude that you do spiritual things to help yourself with your life, to live your best life. But the truth of the matter is when you're a real spiritual person, you go through a lot of difficult things so that you can enhance your spiritual journey. And people just can't hear that, and even if you tell them that sounds good, when it starts happening, they're like, well, this sucks, right? So once you enter onto the spiritual path, your material life is not good. It's like, it's your happiness is no longer your goal on a daily basis. And you should try to be happy and work to be happy, but be happy in every circumstance. It's not predicated on what's going on with your life. Whether you're disappointed, you got bad days, good days. You don't focus on any of that shit, right? Like it's not, the things that, oh, these are the things that would make me happy. These are the good things. These are the bad things. So I want to prevent the bad things, which are usually things that are, being sick, being, stressed out, being lonely, being disappointed, failure, all this stuff that people consider bad things. There's things that, oh, this is a bad thing. I don't like this thing. I don't want this thing, right? Oh, these are the good things. So I want these things. These are the good things that make me feel good. These are the things that I want. These are the things I don't want. And on a spiritual path, it's none of that. God is giving you whatever you need, and you be grateful for it, and you find a way that it's good for you, that it's important to you, right? That it's, it's that is somehow benefiting you, right? You find a way that it's helping you on your spiritual journey, and that you're suffering things in your material life, so you can benefit spiritually, right? And it's just to what degree you're willing to commit to that attitude, because you can take you can eat as much shit as you're willing to, because it's the more you suffer. There's this idea that people sleep on a bed of nails, and they make themselves suffer, and that's not what we're talking about here. It's whatever you're supposed to deal with. Like there's things in your samskaric package, your destiny, that are unpleasant, then are painful, and are difficult things to go through. And of course, one of them is your inevitable death, right? Which is, something everyone needs to prepare for, but nobody does. And so those things are going to happen one way or another. And there are good things that are going to happen in your life, things that are considered good, and, those things are going to happen. And so it's just all there for you. And it's just, it's already sort of a script and might not happen now, it could happen today, or it might be pushed back, or it could be accelerated. It could happen earlier than it's supposed to, or it could happen, when it's supposed to, or it's going to happen. You can push it back and prevent yourself from experiencing it. But then it's going to happen no matter what. Either way, it's going to, you're just, and the more things you push off, the more you're going to experience it all at once. And the people experience this in their life where they've pushed off all the pain that they're inevitably going to have to feel. And then all of a sudden their bank of pain gets too much and it bursts open and they go through a fucking avalanche of bad shit all at once, right? Towards the end of their life when they're too weak to deal with it. So this idea of living your best life and everything's going to be great, it doesn't exist, right? In fact, like I said, happiness is predicated on misery, right? All these different, every condition has its opposite. And you don't know happiness until you know misery. Happiness is the opposite of misery. And so if you feel miserable, then happiness is, you feel happiness because you felt the opposite of it, right? Happiness is like, wow, I felt so bad before, now I feel so good. Well, that's the difference, right? The difference is the contrast between these two things. And so in the Aaron Rodgers story, he is doing these things to help himself be a better quarterback and athlete, and also, live a better life, whatever. Now, this stuff that he does with ayahuasca, and he had this retreat where he went into a dark room. And I heard people mocking him about this, like, people in the sporting world mocking him over doing these things, the ayahuasca journey. And then he goes to this someplace in, I think, South America, and there's some place where they have this experience. He went with some of his former teammates, and then some other people were there. And then he went to this room where you go into this dark room, and you live in darkness for like 3 or 4 days or whatever. And people give you meals and whatever, and you have this meditative state. Now, these things are not as good as what I do, like the Sajmark system. And I'm not saying that as some competitive thing. It's because you're taking something material, and like if you take drugs, for example, to have spiritual experiences, ayahuasca or DMT or peyote or LSD, those things will give you maybe what you might consider spiritual experiences, some alternative state of consciousness. But they're not really spiritual because you're taking something material. It's having an effect on your body, and then you're using that to have something that you consider a spiritual experience. And you might be experience. It's definitely an experience, but spiritual is not, it's not what I consider spiritual. The Sajmark meditation, you forget about your body and you dive inward. And you don't need anything. You don't need incense. You don't need music. I have these people where I say, please begin meditation. I do these sittings on Gratefulness meditation. And then every once in a while somebody shows up and they haven't watched the introductory playlist and they haven't learned what the system is about. And they're like, well, there's no talking for 30 minutes, right? Because you're supposed to be meditating, but the people don't know what they're supposed to do because they just randomly showed up on one of my videos, right? Or, they didn't go through there's a channel video that explains everything. But it isn't a guided meditation. I'm not saying anything, there's no mantra, there's no, even mantras are material, like you're using your mind and you have your material side and your spiritual side. In these sittings, you go to your spiritual side and you're trying to, deal with you're working towards dealing with your thoughts and your, any kind of connection to your physical material world. Like when you go to sleep, like, there's a switch that's thrown. You go to sleep and your mind is shut off, right? In a way, because you're having dreams, so it's not completely, you're going to a different state. And you're not conscious, right? You're unaware of your material surroundings. And then you have whatever's going on in your sleep. Whatever dreams there are, whatever happens, wherever your consciousness goes, wherever your soul is, whatever in terms of, what happens. Like I have a whole thing to do on sleep, right? But it's a withdrawing from the material world, right? One moment you're sleepy or getting sleepy, you feel your eyes getting heavy. There's this moment between you cross over from your material life, you shut out the material world, and your body's just laying there vulnerable, right? Like if you're out doing this in nature or something comes start eating you, like these things, right? But you're just, you're dead to the world, as they say. And so that other side, when you cross over to that other side, like it's, in a way that you when you're sleeping, it's like you're dead, like you're in a death state. You're in a passive state, like you're no longer an active living. You're not living in that moment, right? You're withdrawn from your life. And if you look at death as dying, just going to sleep and never waking up, like where do you go? Like what happens? Where is that other part of you? And your soul has experiences, and you have experiences while you're dreaming, and information's given to you, and you don't remember shit. Like you remember a little part of your dream, right? And you're like, well, what happened? Again, I want to talk about this more extensively in a separate video. I already started this like 2 years ago. I have an audio. I have to re-listen to it, and maybe, they don't know what happens when you go to sleep, right? The scientists even, this whole thing, and animals do it. We all do it, right? But this is what I'm talking about in terms of any of these things. And so when you take something material, and it's a material experience that's supposed to, or a material substance that's supposed to induce a spiritual experience, it's not as good. It's a crutch, and it's, it's an unnecessary element, right? It's an unnecessary part of it. But having said that, like, I did some new age stuff, and I whatever went to counseling, and there's a process between whatever you do to like transition from this idea that your life is about one thing, which is material happiness, fame and fortune, whatever. Like you've been told this is the purpose of your life. And in America, the purpose of your life is material success, right? So it's just like the education process. The education process is to give you knowledge that will benefit you in your material life. Like it's knowledge that has a purpose. You go to school to get a job. You don't learn for the sake of learning. Like learning is a thing that happens when you're young, and so that you can get some sort of job or something, right? Whatever you're going to do with your life, whatever it might be, in terms of preparing you for your job, your life, and being a cog in the wheel. Like you're given just enough knowledge to where you can participate in society. You find your role in society, whatever it is. You're given this knowledge, and you have this bandwidth of knowledge and expression, and who you can be as a person, and what you can say, and what you can believe. There are these boundaries, these parameters. You're not supposed to cross over those boundaries, right? Like you see these, some sort of dystopian city in the future in some movie, right? And they have like an area, the Badlands, and you can't go in there, right? You can't cross over out of your area into those areas, right? It's forbidden, and it's the forbidden lands. Like Planet of the Apes, they had that, right? The original Planet of the Apes, they had this area that would show you human cities. And so if you crossed over those lands, you'd find all this artifacts that shows that humans used to rule the world. Now humans can't speak, and apes can. And so if you go in there and you see it, you're like, oh man, humans used to. I mean, there's pictures of, like a gorilla in a cage, and like, they've crossed into these lands, and they don't want the other apes to know about it, right? So they've been told these are the forbidden lands. And so for your education, you're supposed to get the education that prepares you for your slave job, your wage slave job, right, and your participation in the system. But if you keep on getting educated, they're like, what are you doing? Like we told you, stop there. You've already learned all you need to learn. And you go participate in your system, go be happy, have money, have your life, have your holidays, have your, Super Bowls, have your whatever you have, right? This is all there is. Don't be looking for anything else. Don't look at any kind of explanation outside the system. We've explained everything. This is your health care. This is what you do. You get sick, you go to the doctor, he prescribes you some medication, you do that. But then there is these secondary systems, like some, to allopathic medicine, which is some stuff that Aaron Rodgers is exploring, right? So to his credit, and everybody's credit who's here listening to this video, and all the people that, stop listening to the official story and go beyond what you're supposed to go beyond. Like they make it very clear to you, don't do that, right? In various ways, which we'll get into. And Aaron Rodgers is an example of this. So even if you don't get to this, true spirituality, even if you don't get to something, the highest thing, the best thing, at least you're in this process of waking up. At least you're looking beyond the limitations of your own system, right? So our own system is saying, make money, be famous and rich. That's there's higher levels of this, right? There's getting a mundane job and just, underachieving and being, or just, maybe that's the maximum of your achievement, and be a laborer, and you just make enough money to get by, and you do all the other things that everyone else does, right? We have these types of behaviors. Like these things. You eat this kind of foods, you go out to bars, you drink alcohol, these are the, now they're allowing you to smoke marijuana, but you have these things. If you're upset, you go to a counselor, you get counseling, right? You have whatever insurance you have these different options and things. And all of it was with what's socially acceptable, the things that we all know to be socially acceptable. And there's the higher levels where you make lots of money and you become rich and famous and powerful, a politician or something. There's the pinnacle of achievement. But when you realize none of those things is your true goal here, whether it's living a mundane life and just doing your duty and facilitating being a part of a cog in the wheel or whatever it is, or you achieve something great, there's always this emptiness. And Aaron Rodgers recognized it. Aaron Rodgers recognized that he was a perfectionist, which is always a difficult thing to be. And he said it comes from he was missing something. He was broken in some way. He talked about how it came from his family, and that again, that's an explanation in this life, but what created his family, and that's when you get into the spiritual understanding that the thing that was missing in this life came from a previous existence, like something that niggles at you, that like that bothers you, like that just you're you know like it's something inside of you, like it's a thirst that can't be quenched. There's something missing. You're like, there must be something more, right? You have this sense of that beyond the beastly system, and you see this in movies and TV shows all the time. And these people are celebrated, the heroes that push past the parameters of the system, but in the system itself that makes the movies, the system you're living in, you're not supposed to do that. And so Aaron Rodgers realized he wasn't, that he had himself what he is as a football player. And to be the football player, you have to be tough and competitive and things. And then he wanted to experience this other part of himself. Like, what is he outside of football? What, besides being a quarterback and being famous and these things, being good at football, what else is he? And what is he going to be afterwards? And, that's a valid question to ask, because all these athletes go through it. Because when this is all there is, right, in terms of your life is just football, and so you play football, then maybe you coach, you're an analyst, and all you do is talk sports. If that's all you can become, that's I guess that's what it is, right? But there's much more besides something like that. If all you are is your job, then what happens when you can't do your job anymore? What happens when you retire, right? Because at some point you're not going to do your job. You're going to retire from your job. Your life's work is going to be over. And you watch those people, and they're just nothing there anymore. They have no purpose. They're just waiting to die. This happened to my dad, who hated his job, lived a shitty life, failed, scared of life. And then he's scared of death. Like, now there's nothing. Like, he wasn't going to play golf. Like, I played golf with my dad like 3 or 4 times or whatever it was, 5, 6, 7 times. I don't know. I can remember like 2 or 3. Like, when I was a kid, I went with him to this Buena Vista 9-hole golf course in West Hartford, Connecticut, where I grew up. A beautiful little course, but small, like very small. And I remember there's this garden spider, giant garden spider. There was a hole that there was a, like, you hit it over over a creek, and you had to hit it up like sort of a hill almost. Not almost, there's a hill. And there was a cool walk down where you walked over the creek at a bridge. There was no golf carts. There was just, you walked the course. And there's this giant garden spider, which years later I come back. So I'm like 10 years old. I play golf with my dad, maybe once or twice. And then I remember the holes. And so he came back, and I was in college. And now I'm like, 6'1", 180 pounds of, like, I've been playing high level sports. And I play a little bit of golf. And we go out to golf, and my dad's like, go ahead and hit it. Like, he didn't want me to do over the water. He didn't do over the water either, because he didn't want to lose the golf balls, because he's all cheap and shit, and like, whatever. And I'm like, there's people up there. My dad's like, no, you're never going to hit it there. I'm like, I'm not a 10-year-old kid anymore. Like, I can easily hit that, right? Like, I can totally hit that, right? And he's like, no, go hit it. I'm like, no, like, there's people there. We're going to be pissed off if the ball's going to hit at one of them, right? And he's like, if I hit a good shot, it's going to happen. And, and I wasn't like, even now, once in a while we go to like a driving range. And I hit maybe, 2 out of 3 in the beginning, and then 1 out of 4 at the end, good shots. Like like quality golf shots. You're using a driver or whatever. Not controlling the distance, just so I hit it straight, right? But I can unload on the thing. So, I go, all right, fine. You take the blame for it, right? And he goes, sure. And so I hit it, and like it almost hits a guy. Like, I clear the creek, and it hits the green or whatever. Like and of course we're gonna hit a good shot, because it was a big fuck you to my dad, right? We're having an argument, so I'm gonna come through with a good shot. Like, it's just gonna happen, because he's just that kind of guy. But then later on, and then these guys, these old guys on the course, right? They're yelling at us, and I point to my dad, right? And I'm laughing because, And so we go down to the 9th hole, and those guys are still in front of us. He's like, go ahead and hit. I'm like, dude, we already did this. I can totally hit him. And we do the whole thing again. It's like, hey, you keep on hitting us. Just the ball lands next to him, right? But like just no whatever. But my dad sucked at golf, is what I'm saying. It was just this thing, and he didn't really enjoy it. Like he was out there, but he retired and he was going to play golf every day. This is what people think. He didn't have anything. He didn't have friends. He didn't have hobbies. He fell apart, right? And so when you don't have a spiritual goal, and you're now in the death process, and your life's over, you've accomplished what you're going to accomplish. Your best days as a person are over, and now you're in the transition process to your death process. And if you've done nothing to connect with that part of yourself, the spiritual part, then you're completely fucked. You're scared. You're miserable. You're terrified of death. You're whatever. And so like this is what happens to people, and they just diminish, right? They physically fall apart. Their mind goes. So anyways, so this thing with Aaron Rodgers, to his credit, he was looking beyond this stuff, realizing there's life after football, realizing he had these two sides, the football player and then the person that's Aaron Rodgers. He realized he was broken in some ways. He considered it to be mostly due to his family, right? And so it's good in that sense because it is an actual person who's seeking something more outside of his indoctrination and his training, and more so than you see with other people. And he's, learning about things outside of what you're supposed to learn about. Like he's watching truther stuff, and he has these, questions about, the same thing that normal truthers do, and he might not be as good as a truther as you are, or whatever it is, or whatever people think. But it's the process itself that is to be commended because, you have these parameters, you have these boundaries that you're not supposed to cross, and many people in the truth community don't really cross them. Many people who are, they consider themselves truthers, they don't really cross them. They just redefine them. And they still are in this gatekeeper mentality. But if Aaron Rodgers, to his credit, is doing these other things, like you can see that he's actually on a spiritual journey. Now, there's problems with it, and some of his things are not problems, like, maybe he'll realize later on if he continues, these things. But some of his ideas was that he couldn't love himself because of his family, but loving yourself is not possible. I've said this before. Self-love is not a real thing. That's just some new age bullshit they tell you. Because, I guess you can like yourself, and is whatever it is. But none of those things, that's all ego shit, right? You loving yourself is an ego thing. You are love, right? Like love flows through you. At your basis, your pristine, your soul and your subtle bodies, your love energy, you're the divine energy, right? Godly energy. And so there's already love there. Like you have love in your system. Most people have diminished their love. It's like you can't extinguish it, but it's, for all intents and purposes, it's dead, like inside them. And there's no rebooting it. Like there's no spark, there's no, it can be done, but the people have they're so empty and so bankrupt, they don't have the energy to pull themselves up from that. They just don't. Like they could, but they have to find some drive, some energy. Maybe they get angry, maybe something happens and they're able to, wake up or whatever, right? We all have gone through that. There's a point where I was really depressed in India, right? I just, I was going through this divorce and everything had turned on me, and the mission, like all these things had happened. My kids, my whole intergenerational family farm thing that I was going to do with my family, it all fell apart. And I was just going through it, the cleaning. I was just lying there, like just dead, like just beaten. And like I heard a voice say, "Fight back." And I got fired up about things. Like I made things competitive. Like I needed a lower level kind of motivation to drive my spiritual journey. Like sometimes you need that. Like I wanted to compete. I wanted to prove everybody wrong. I was doing this YouTube channel and all these things, and I needed some competitive fire and things to, one of the things about being spiritual, and there's, in the Sajmark system, it's called non-attachment attachment. And so you're supposed to be non-attached to things, but perform like you're attached to them. Like there's an attachment there, but it's not, something you can easily let go. Because you can't live life and not have attachments and not have some preferences and not have, all the things that you have. But you can't let them dominate your life and become addictions, right? You can't, let your drive to win or succeed. You need to have some drive or you won't try. You have to have your material life too, and that's the other option. That's the other problem. The people who seek spiritual lives and go run off and become monks and run off into the the wilderness, and they do all these extraordinary you know abstinence types of behaviors where they starve themselves and fasting and sleeping on a bed of nails or whatever it might be to negate their material life. They don't have families, they don't have jobs, they don't participate in society, and that's going the wrong direction that way. Like in the Sajmark system, the brilliant idea of you need two wings to fly, a material wing and a spiritual wing. And most people are neglecting the spiritual wing, but then they go the other way. And they become these people who are, and it's all material. It's still material because they're not doing true spirituality. It's finding balance. And it's being able to have these things, but not get so attached to them that they prevent you from moving forward spiritually, but not neglecting them either, where you're not fulfilling your material responsibilities. Like you're in a body, you're a part of a system, a society, you have to contribute to some extent, and you have to find the motivation to do that. And in the early stages of your life, and sometimes even later in life, you need petty things sometimes to motivate you. You need to prove yourself. You need to be competitive. Like these are things that drive you. You need some competitive drive. Like those are just because you have to have it. But then it fades. Like the reasons I used to make these videos, and the reason I make them now are much. The reasons I make them now is much. Comes from a much more spiritual place and less about anything kind of egotistical. Like I'm not getting an egotistical boost from making the videos like I did when I first started. Like I don't need affirmations. I don't need to be, whatever. Like it's, there needs to be something there. Like otherwise I'm just speaking to myself. There has to be some kind of an audience. The videos themselves have to be resonating with the audience. People have to be benefiting from the videos. But, like some of it's just potential. Like when I first became a preceptor, there were a number of people when I got off the plane from India and I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico. There was a guy who already he was an Indian guy who was going to the UNM, University of New Mexico. And he was already practicing Abhyasi, a person that does the meditation. And then he knew people who were interested in doing it. And so he brought 3 or 4 people in. I put some like posters up, and all of a sudden there's like 6, 7, 8 people all wanting to do this meditation. But then he transfers because he wants to be near a better center. And so he goes, and then all these other people quit. And so I still was doing the meditation just with nobody sitting there. Every week I do Sunday meditation with the idea that some days there'd be people that were there, right? Like it's, you're creating the potential for something. You're creating the condition in the field. And even though there's no one to receive it physically, there are people's souls out there who can receive it, right? Same kind of thing that's with the Gratefulness meditation. These sittings are up there that people could potentially find and take use of, right? But when I'm doing it, there's nobody there, right? There's nobody here. It's just the idea that people are going to be meditating. Same thing when I do these voiceovers. I'm here, my dog's here, no one else is listening to this. And what happens in reality, this is what's happening in physical reality, and on this earthly plane of existence. And then this voiceover gets transformed into digital format. It's a copy of what I'm doing here. And I put it in some sort of, this will have a couple of pictures, maybe of Aaron Rodgers and some other things, right? Like this is going to be a standalone video. I can see already it's almost an hour long and whatever. And then some people listen to this, most likely, right? But, things could change, right? But somebody will listen to this and maybe benefit from it or not, right? Get something out of it. And so it's just, you do it because you're supposed to do it. You know what to do when you do it. You don't need motivation. You don't need competitive fire. Like, I don't need those things now. But at one point I did, right? But anyways, this thing about self-love doesn't exist, right? You don't need to, there's no loving yourself. Like that's not possible. Love flows through you. Love is something you feel for other things and other people. You give love. Love passes through you like a conduit. On the highest level, you're a conduit and love is constantly flowing through you to other people, and they can benefit from it or not. That's their choice. And it happens in a way that nothing has to be said, right? In terms of the, the people that you, like your spouse and people you tell them you love them, that's, those words mean something, but like it's beyond that where there's actual, this love energy that flows through you to other people. And so in that, Aaron Rodgers does these ayahuasca trips, which he, is the same, which they call ancient medicine, and he goes to these places. And it's a tribal thing, and I'm not shitting on it because I just know that there's better stuff. It's something, but it isn't, everything. And using hallucinogenics and things that are, change your consciousness, you will have experiences, and I don't know, I can't evaluate those experiences, and they might be, on the fringe of being spiritual. But spiritual experiences are best experienced, and the experiences themselves mean nothing. Experiences keep you going. My first initial sittings to doing the Sajmark system were out of this world, transformational. But the experiences themselves I needed, or I would have quit. So it was like something I needed to get me going. Like it wasn't necessarily, other people don't have those experiences, and they feel something, but it isn't the kind of experience that I had. And so, does it mean that my thing was better? No, it's what I needed. This was something I needed to be like shown right off the bat. This is it. And then once I had that, there was no quitting because I knew it, because I experienced it, right? And so for me, it was, a defining moment. But in terms of like, I have knowledge, like I have a ton of knowledge about this stuff, right? I have insight. That's why people watch these videos. And, it used to mean something to me. Like it used to be, wow, like I know this stuff, or, even just stuff that I knew was coming through me, and just, from being an incompetent person before, an underachieving person before, and then like I was able to do things better. I operate better. I'm a better cook. Like just in the flow of things, right? Like I just, I'm a effective person now, and I know it's all due to the system. I was missing this connection, and then once I had it, it just everything made sense, and I was able to sort of crack the code. My wife said that about our dinner last night. You just really cracked the code on this thing, right? But there was a point where I needed validation, and then there's a point where I no longer needed validation. Very little validation from the external world, right? Like I'm supposed to be doing this, and I'm doing it, and I'm just going to keep on doing it because I'm supposed to do it. And when I'm not supposed to do it, I'll stop, right? So it's just like that kind of thing. And so the validation, it's maybe like 5%, whatever minimal validation that needs to be there to keep me, motivated to keep on doing this, because it's affecting people in a positive way, and there's some, But to think about it like I'm serving people is the wrong way to go about it, that I'm serving God. And by serving God, other people are benefiting from it, right? But I have knowledge. And it's, and I'm right about a lot of things, and I've predicted things in a sense, or seen things, right? And people are always pointing it out because I forget about it. But it doesn't mean anything. Like, it's just, so what? Like, it used to mean something because it was, no, I could see that I knew more than like the average person. Like, that was kind of cool. But in terms of knowing things, like it's just knowledge, and like what people think is enlightenment is not a real goal, because, knowledge has to be used for something. Like it has to have a purpose. Like knowledge for knowledge's sake itself is in a way pretentious, and it's ego driven, and it's, unnecessary. Trying to be smart or being the smartest person in the room, what? It's like it's some kind of competition. Like knowledge has to have some kind of use. Like you have to be able to apply it to your life. All the principles that I talk about here. Some of them I like, some of them I don't, but I know them all to be true. Some of them I embrace better than others. Some of them I'm able to adapt and adopt to, and adopt as, my principles. And I always work towards that. Number one is to be grateful, right? Be grateful for everything, because everything comes from God. And God has a plan, and so whatever's happening is God's plan. And that's not always easy, and sometimes it's easier than other times. Like the good days, it's always easy, but the bad days, of course, it's harder. But, in all that, it's the application of the knowledge that's important. How are you able to, live the principles and knowledge that you have? There's lots of people who can articulate spiritual points or religious philosophy, but they don't, they're horrible people in their lives, and they're not applying any of it, right? It's like they understand it, but they don't utilize it. So it's the experience of it, it's the application of it. It's not the enlightenment part. It's the fact that you're actually willing to embrace those teachings and live those things. Even if it's just a little bit of teaching, it's better have a little bit of knowledge that you apply to your life than have all the knowledge and don't apply any of it, right? And self-knowledge, which is the driving force behind these new age things. And Aaron Rodgers is a little bit embroiled in that in this documentary. And I'm not criticizing him. Like I said, it's a good thing that he's just he's opening up to a bigger understanding of his existence, and that there's a spiritual side, and that's a step in the right direction for anybody, especially in these times, especially somebody famous and successful, because those people they have the least chance, right? There's a story Master Charger used to tell that there's these guys waiting to go get into heaven, and like St. Peter, like it's not what we believe. He's a Hindu, but he went to Catholic or Christian schools, right? But this is like a story he told. He used stories from various religious traditions and spiritual traditions, like they were all embroiled because they're all a part of the same thing. They're all one movement that people have divided up. Like every spiritual person that's lived, you have a connection to, and I don't want to say a debt of gratitude, but you should at least be grateful for what they helped humanity move towards, because each spiritual person that's come has uplifted some part of humanity. So Krishna isn't at war with Jesus. These souls work together. These souls are around each other, right? These souls, like either in a physical form, with these higher developed souls that come down, are always working for the betterment of humanity and working for God. They're on the same team. It's the religions have divided these things because they're materialistic, indoctrination, gatekeeping organizations, right? And so that's why people think that there's religious wars should never exist, because these beings are not at war with each other. There might be some subtle differences. There might be some differences of opinions, difference of direction, little small things that people have, souls have, that give them some sovereignty, some egotistical perspective. But in a spiritual world where there's no physical body, the truth is the truth, and everybody knows what the truth is. Like everyone knows who's higher than who, and these things. Like there's no sense of pride. There's no sense of being mad at the boss, right, or whatever. You just accept that this being is beyond you, and you take direction because you're all working for the same cause, right? And there's this idea of like any sort of hierarchy there is understood without any sort of like jealousy and like petty little human shit that we have, right? But this New Age movement has this idea of self-knowledge and self-love. And you need self-knowledge, you need to know yourself and all these things. You have to be mindful, and you have to spend all yourself. It's very self-indulgent, and there's no real purpose to it. Like you just have to have a sense of who you are as a person. Oh, did I tell that story? I didn't tell that story. And so, like I got sidetracked. And so there's this line of souls, and it's mostly poor people, working people. And this rich person shows up, and he's brought to heaven in like a limousine. He gets out, he walks past everybody, past the line, past the queue, and gets like special treatment as he comes into heaven. And they're like a party and celebration. And so there's this guy getting pissed off, this soul that's getting pissed off, who's a hardworking person. And he was like, and he had this leftover residual resentment towards these rich people. So he gets up to St. Peter and goes like, what the hell's going on here? I understand these guys had privileges and wealth in the material world, but even in heaven, you guys give them extra treatment. And St. Peter says, people like you come here every day. You're a dime a dozen. But a rich person, like they almost never come. So when somebody's a rich person, they're able to make it here. We celebrate it, right? Because the more wealth you have, the more success you have. It's hard to navigate all that and become a spiritual person. You have all these distractions. I mean, it's where your material life keeps on pulling you away from your potential spiritual life. But people who are miserable and suffering, and they just have all these mundane experiences, they have to cling to God. They need God to just get them through their daily life, their days. And so it's easier for them, right? So, to his credit, Aaron Rodgers has all this success and all this, materialism, and he's able to still have a craving to, this drive to become to work on the spiritual side. So having said all that, there was a few key things I wanted to point out. Now, Aaron Rodgers goes through it, like in the third episode, he talks about the whole thing that happened with him saying he was immunized. And, he could have done it better. Like, he admits that he could have chose his words more carefully. So he was asked if he was vaccinated. And he went through this protocol. He found a naturopath, right? Because he said his dad was against vaccines. So he grew up in a family that had some issues. His families were, they're Christians. And he's had this division with his family, right? And his family has talked shit about him and made their kind of issues public. And he said, like, his younger brother went on The Bachelor, or Bachelorette, or whatever it was, right? And he said, the guy, and he said, he did it just to be famous. His words, not mine. That his brother said just to be famous. And his brother shit on him. And then there's that, go home to meet the parents kind of episode on The Bachelor, whatever it is, towards the end. And there's 2 empty seats there where Aaron was supposed to be. I guess maybe his other brother. Something like that. And, and he said he went on this bullshit show just to be famous and then shit all over Aaron and then caused this, this storyline where Aaron Rodgers was estranged from his family, right? This whole thing. And, just stupid stuff because it doesn't get better when you invite the media into your whatever is going on there. But his dad was against vaccines, or, didn't believe in them. And the flu and whatever, he explained this. And he said he also was studying these things. So he had a difference of opinion. He doesn't believe in the official story. He's looked outside of the mainstream, healthcare system and has done his own thing, which many people have done. Many New Age people and liberal people did. But then when the thing came around, it was political. And if you were an anti-vaxxer, you were somehow a Republican. If you weren't, you were a Democrat. And so people just, they folded into their collective just group consciousness, their whatever it is, right? Which I'll get back to in a second. And so Aaron Rodgers went to this naturopath, and he took this protocol that this person put together, and then he filed it with the NFL because the NFL was very witch hunty about, like, who got what. Like, if you were vaccinated and you tested positive for COVID, if you had a negative test 4 days later, you could go play. You could be back on the field. But if you tested positive and you weren't vaccinated, then you were going to be away for 10 days mandatory. And you then had to go through all these protocols. Like, there was all these limitations. And there's no evidence that we now know of any of this stuff. Like, they were just told this. It was bullshit, which we all know. The two different ways of treating people, we all know was, like, based in just not science, but things that they just made up and shit. And, like, so, but Aaron Rodgers was experiencing that. So the third day in, they asked him, and he had said he had a plan. He talked to his publicist about it. If he got vaccinated, he said he was immunized, which, to the people who were listening to that, thought it was, he was saying he was vaccinated, right? And he said if they gave him a follow-up question, he would have explained his whatever it was. Now, a lot of these people, these Stephen A. Smith and, these other people that have gone after him, Stephen A. Smith was a little bit less because he, I think, liked Aaron Rodgers maybe more. Ryan Clark maybe more so, right? Who hated Aaron Rodgers. But their thing was they didn't have a problem with him not getting vaccinated, but they did have a problem with him lying. That was the story that they all started to say, which they know is bullshit. Deep down, they know is bullshit, and everyone should else know. We saw the way they treated Kyrie Irving. If Aaron Rodgers came out, and he would have been a target because of who he was, even more so than other players. And so we know that would have happened. But what Aaron Rodgers said that I didn't know beforehand was that he had filed he put a 500-page document in, and they classified him as unvaccinated. But he appealed it because he wanted them to take a look at and possibly say that there was alternative ways of dealing with COVID, and that his thing was just as legitimate, and he shouldn't be punished because of his not getting the vax. And so if he said that he wasn't, when the person asked the question, if he said that he wasn't, then the NFL would say drop his appeal because he's admitting that it's not the same thing. Like, he wanted to put what he did on the same level to the NFL, even though the NFL wasn't going to agree with him, because the NFL is connected to big pharma just like the media and everybody else, which is something no one's willing to talk about. So he was demonized for lying and being a bad teammate and all these things. I mean, this is stuff that I showed you. Terry Bradshaw said it was with the military, and he was at the military academy. He said Aaron Rodgers has a lot to learn from these guys about lying, and they all lie. They're all lying pieces of shit, right? Like they didn't go after Bill Belichick the same way when he fucking cheated, or Tom Brady when he fucking cheated, right? Like they didn't demonize him the same way that they demonized Aaron Rodgers. And there's a group think to this, and I want to come back to that because there's one more example of this. I want to talk about the group think to end this video. And so the other part was Aaron Rodgers was contemplating retiring from the Green Bay Packers, and I think they wanted to use him as a trade asset to what eventually would be the Jets, and so, or they didn't want him to retire yet, but they had drafted a quarterback, Jordan Love, and part of this was like Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre, because Brett Favre was kind of a dick to Aaron Rodgers because he was drafted to replace him, and Aaron Rodgers was talking about how he did a better job, even though he was upset when they drafted Jordan Love, who is now the quarterback for the Packers. And to the Packers, like their benefit, like they're a very small market team. Green Bay is a very small city. But they have a good system, just like the Pittsburgh Steelers do, and some of these other perennial, what the New England Patriots did when Bill Belichick was there. They were constantly putting out a good product. They were constantly, a winning organization. And the way the Packers have done that, managing things, was that even though when they had a Hall of Fame quarterback, they drafted a guy to replace him, and they slowly trained this guy to be his replacement. And it worked with Aaron Rodgers, and now it's working with Jordan Love, right? The current quarterback for the Packers. But anyways, he was figuring out whether he was going to retire. And this stuff was coming out about his ayahuasca, and he was sharing these things. He was on the Pat McAfee show. And this was like before COVID and then after COVID. And then, the way he was demonized. And he went into this dark thing that he did, this dark room, whatever. I had a friend who did, I think it's called Vipassana yoga. And there was a young couple, and they milked our cows when we went on travel. And they didn't drink the milk, but they wanted to experience this. And now they live in a normal, like, I'm friends with the wife of the guy on Facebook. But I was better friends with the guy when they used to come over. And they were just, a young couple. They just had a baby, and they built a small, tiny house. And it was amazing. They bought land with their uncle, and they were living completely off the grid. And they had this great spring and great spring water, and they had run a pump up to the house. And the woman was, she had went to like Georgia Tech. She was homeschooled. Her parents were some of the first homeschoolers, right? Her parents had, like, there's people who, and they're mostly Christians, who fought the system to make homeschooling legitimate. And this is what I'm talking about with Aaron Rodgers. You have your beastly system, and then if you want to bring in something new, you have to fight the legislative battle, which many of these parents had to do across the country. Like there's these websites you can go to and find out what are the good states for homeschooling. Of course, after COVID, so many people adopted homeschooling. So many kids were homeschooled because of these people had made this thing a thing, right? They made it whatever. And this young woman's parents were some of the first pioneers of that, right, years ago. I met her parents, I think, at one point. But she went to Georgia Tech. They met at Georgia Tech. Virginia Tech, and she studied horticulture, and she knew all about plants, and they used to forage, and they lived up, and they were doing stuff that was beyond what me and my family were doing on farm. And now they're living he went back to school to get his degree. He's like a psychologist now, the guy is, right? And so his wife and I are still friends on Facebook. We haven't been in communication for years. But I was disheartened to see that she was putting out like I got vaccinated thing because they were so non-mainstream, living off the grid, and now, they're living in a traditional, whatever it is, like their kids going to regular school, and they still have these skills though, whatever. So that might be something. They had this epic garden, like the garden was amazing. They were doing a good job, right? So maybe a little bit bummed that they are, embraced it's hard to do it's hard to be off the grid. But anyways, he did this thing called Vipassana yoga, and they would sit for 12 hours and meditate, and it was physical. Like you would sit with your legs crossed, and it was physically painful. And eventually, the physical pain was supposed to drive you inside, and you'd have a spiritual experience. And he had done this a number of times, And I told him about the Sajmarg method. And I know the Sajmarg method is better because of transmission and cleaning and the fact that, the physical pain is just drawing you outwards. I mean, I understand the principle behind what they're doing, but there's no real, there may be some small benefit to it, but it misses the point of forgetting about your body, forgetting about your ego, and going and connecting to your spiritual side. So, there's just people, the ego wants things to be hard, right? Because you connect to God and your spiritual side when you go to sleep. Like it's easy as going to sleep. I mean, but that's not meditation. That's not effort. That just happens automatically. And so connecting to God isn't hard, but people make it hard. They want to go through something. And, you have to go through things to create a cleaning of the things that are obstructing your connection to God. And that is whatever it is, right? You're going through your life issues, your difficulties, your, negative things that can clean out some of your egotistical bullshit that you need to go. You've passed some scars and these impressions that you have, right? So these are all, but if you just focus on that, like the part that's a Sajmark philosophy, instead of doing all these difficult things or whatever it is that are not a part of it, right? People have a lot of mental chatter, and so sitting in a dark room for 3 days, like solitary confinement, you have to confront yourself because you're cutting yourself off from distractions. But you can still do that without sitting in a room for 3 days, right? Like that's extraordinary. But whatever, that's what Aaron Rodgers chose to do. I'm not criticizing in the sense that, you have these different systems, and a lot of these new age things they don't result in the results of the system aren't something spiritual, right? It's just more manifestation of the ego. And so, like, sometimes they even cause some kind of damage. But anyways, he makes this choice, right? And he has some sort of spiritual experience, and he has some, like a decision to go to New York. He has this idea that would be where to go because he has connections there. Like he has connections with the coach, his former offensive coordinators there, and these other people. He likes the head coach and, all these things, and he sees going to New York, and he has this egotistical vision, of like a dream of something. Sometimes you get lured into something because you think it's going to go one way, and you have this vision of something. It's you like deceive yourself to believe that it's going to go in a way that it doesn't. Like people do that all the time. You think something's going to be better than it is, and if you had all the information and knowledge that you have after you experience it, you would never have made that choice. But it was a necessary choice because you had to go through something unpleasant. So God's, like your soul is allowing yourself to be to deceive yourself, allowing your ego to think something's going to happen when it's not, just so that you can have the spiritual benefit. Because I'm sure there's a lot of spiritual benefit that Aaron Rodgers has gotten from the whole New York Jets debacle, right? But he makes this decision, and all these people are mocking him because he went into this dark room and he sat there for 3 days. And, I said to my wife, if he had gone to Vegas and gambled and got drunk and went on vacation, did all kinds of, hedonistic things that are considered normal under our traditional system, there would be no criticism, right? But he's doing something and they're making fun of it in the dark room, and they're piling on past the whole thing with the immunization vax thing that he did, and then the ayahuasca stuff, right? Because it's not part of what this beast and the people that run the beast have told people is okay, right? You can smoke pot now because everyone does it and it's legal. You can use pharmaceutical drugs that have all kinds of side effects, and ones that are there for your whatever it might be. You can go to counseling. You can go to psychiatrist and get on Prozac or something and say that, that's how you dealt with, whatever issues that you're having, right? Whatever unhappiness you're having. And they would celebrate you, like, for the most part. I mean, again, you fail in the field and you don't produce. What's one thing. But they're attacking the guy personally. And the hatred, and, they show the quotes and some of the things. Like, there was a point where they showed Aaron Rodgers. It was the local news in Green Bay. And there's a woman with cancer who was waiting for him to sign her cap, her hat, and Aaron Rodgers just walks by her at an airport. But he says from the camera view, you don't see that there's 200 people waiting for all these players, and sometimes they just don't have time to stop. And so they made this story that Aaron Rodgers, this woman, just was this cancer. This woman's got, she's an older woman she's bald, and she just wants Aaron Rodgers to sign her cap and what a prick he is. And those headlines are brutal, right? And the people are talking about it. And the woman says, I felt so bad about it because a week ago he signed my shirt and he talked to her for 5 minutes. And this time he just, wasn't paying attention. And, sometimes these guys they can't give every autograph, right? But they just demonized the guy, and it was completely, bullshit, because the woman herself admitted that he had already interacted with her. So this is the way that the media treats people and the way that they construct these narratives, but especially when you go outside the box. And so Aaron Rodgers sitting in a dark room is certainly better than going to Vegas and gambling and being with prostitutes and drinking and doing drugs and then making your decision about which team to go to or whether you're going to retire or not, right? But one of them is considered socially acceptable. And the same thing with this stuff, with the vax stuff, that the beast system told you this is what we're going to do. And if you don't do it, and I've showed you the montage of clips of people saying all these things about the anti-vax hate, right? If you're not doing this, and Joe Biden said this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And so even though the government didn't make it mandatory, they shamed everybody into doing it. And you were a problem if you weren't, and you're being selfish. And all the people that just do these things, right? And going back to what I was saying about Christmas, that you're told that Christmas is supposed to be a certain way. And that you have these obligations to your family members. Oftentimes you have no connection. The connection with your family members fades. And there's nothing between you. There's nothing between me and my family members. My brother and I do the same meditation, but, there's just nothing there, right? We can spend a little time with each other. And, of course, he's a little bit more aware because he does do the meditation, but now he's with Dodgy, the scammer, so then even that's gone, right? And then everyone else, they're living their lives, and I don't wish anything bad on them, and there's nothing like that, but I'm not, spending time with them for what, right? We don't have anything in common. Our journey, our part of our journey is over. And so you have these people in your life that you're supposed to spend time with, and they sometimes, are very manipulative in making it happen, even though they don't acknowledge. But the truth is that they don't even want to be with you. You don't have a good time with them. You see this all the time with families getting together. It's more prevalent now with the division over the Trump and all these things, right? And families were disowning people because they didn't get vaccinated or they voted for Trump and, all these things, right? And that's just reality coming to play. That why spend time with people that there's nothing there between you? It's just forced interaction. You're told this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do this. You're supposed to sit in church. You're supposed to believe this. This is, all of these things. And then when you start questioning these things, you've been so indoctrinated. People have been so indoctrinated that they push back against it and they go after people. And that's what you see with Aaron Rodgers. So them saying these things about Aaron Rodgers and them saying about Kyrie Irving. Now, I didn't experience this much myself. Of course, there was some of the stuff that I had to deal with on YouTube with the medical misinformation guidelines and stuff. So, there's that. There's censorship. But watching other people go through that's sending a message to all of us. Yeah, just do what you're told. Take the shot to do this, get these things, do this. These are the things you're supposed to do. And anybody who doesn't do those things is supposed to be ostracized and made fun of by the Borg sheeple mentality of this indoctrination of a system that's completely fucked, right? Because at the very basis of this system is a bad system. It disconnects you from God. It disconnects you from nature. It disconnects you from family. And you're living a life that's completely unnatural for human beings. And it's, based in the faulty premise that an economy based in debt is always going to be there for you. So you're not going to need your traditional tribal skills and the things you need to survive. And that's not, that's a complete lie because we now see the system imploding and nobody knows what the fuck to do because we don't know how to live outside the system, right? And even as the system collapses, people are still gatekeeping and going after people. And the Aaron Rodgers documentary is a good example. Like if you want to see something play out like that, because you hear his side of the story, and like I said, some of it's self-involved, some of the new age stuff for me, and I know it to be ineffective and kind of annoying and pretentious. Some of the things that people engage with, in terms of these pseudo spiritual journeys, are like it's hopefully the beginning to something, right? Awakening doesn't happen all at once, like I said, but there's a stage, and then you have to experience things that to eventually find a vertical system that connects you directly to the divinity within you, and teachings and principles like that happen in the Sagemark system that can elevate someone on their spiritual journey. And there's a method to help you, and there's a philosophy there to understand the method, and it's just up to you. And that's where the failure exists, because people, some level of it, there's always ego pushback. Your ego doesn't want you to become what you are destined to become, and that's the problem with humanity. The ego is has a life of its own, and if the soul realizes itself, right, if a person realizes the soul within them, then the ego is more or less diminished, and the egos just don't want that to happen. That's why there is this obsession with the lower. The higher exists for people, but people always choose the lower. And all of us, even people on the spiritual path, even more so people on the spiritual path, this battle rages inside of them. So I find all of this interesting, and especially as the last episode, when he's doing things that are outside the mainstream experience, and how he's mocked, and there's all this hatred for it, and he's demonized in some way. But the average football player, I mean, there's drug use, and there's all these negative behaviors, gambling and fucking, Vegas, and these hedonistic behaviors. I mean, it's a very violent sport itself. It's war. Like there's a lot of negative to be said about football. It's so brutal. It's war. It's it's a sport that's the equivalent to war, right? It's such a violent, land acquisition. I mean, that's what marching your football down the field, right? Like the defense is the country that's getting invaded, and the offense is the invasion, right? You have a ground game and a war game. I mean, you have a ground game and an air game, right? Like there's an aerial attack, and there's a ground attack, and there's there's trick plays, and all this type of stealing information, and spying, and like all the shit that happens in war, right? And there's military jets flying over, all this stuff. And so football itself has its its low vibrational aspect to it. And so Aaron Rodgers strives. It has something inside of him that made him want to be more than that, and find a deeper purpose and meaning to his life. And they attacked him. And I said this about saints, and this is what happens. It's happened over and over in the Christian tradition, that somebody's killed and crucified, and they're like, oh yeah, that person was a saint. Like somebody who reaches a higher level of spiritual knowledge, and it isn't even that high a level. And the powers that be in Europe and America, this is more of a white people problem. I mean, it exists in other places as well, but India is one of the few places it doesn't. That's why India is like special. India celebrates their saints. They also celebrate their charlatans, so they're con men. So unfortunately, there's both things, and they celebrate their celebrities. But the fact that if somebody becomes a spiritual person and starts bringing in some level of criticism and some just speaking truth to power, that it is not dealt with in a way where they crucify you, which is what happened to Jesus, of course, and then all these other saints that have followed him in the Christian tradition. And see it over and over again, that everyone's so willing to gatekeep and so willing to jump on and speak for the official system, even though they're just told something by a system that's hurt them over and over again. Like everyone kind of has a bad experience with pharmaceuticals, as far as big pharma. People like big pharma isn't a positive term, and then they've had issues with doctors and medical. They've either had a family member who suffered or died because of medical maltreatment, and the mainstream medical model isn't great, and everyone knows it, and yet they're like, oh, just do this and you'll COVID, right? when they're the ones who created it and released it. You know, like, but people just went along with it and demonized people. So let me just show you that. I'll end the video here, and those who are interested in seeing it, I'll just put on that whole clip that I have about them demonizing anti-vaxxers. It's a compilation, that's there, just as a way for people to see just some small part of the way they demonized anybody who chose not to have the official, what was told to them was going to be the cure. And of course, even Bill Gates said that this thing COVID mutated itself out of existence. So I'll, put that in there as well. I think that's part of that. Actually, that's a part of that montage. But anyways, let me wrap this up here. But I'm going to show you I'm going to do the ending of my video, and then after that will be the montage, and then there won't be anything. I'm not going to say the ending again. Okay, before I get to that, my wife and I went for a walk, and I had a few more thoughts. Sometimes I just, get worn out, but I talk for an hour, and that's a long time. But just, kind of the most important piece of this, and I say this over and over again, but repetition is important because the indoctrination, you're being told the same lies and the same gatekeeping bullshit and all these things every day. Like, this is how indoctrination works. So repetition is a big part of what people need to hear. And whether, it registers at first, it may take 100 times before it makes sense or before you actually notice it. Sometimes your mind will click off and your ego will purposely either not hear or misunderstand something that is a threat to it, right? So that's one of the defense mechanisms that, you can be talking to people, your sheeple friends, and you can see their eyes glass over, and they can't make connections with what you're saying. And so they have to make fun of you, or they have to get mad at you, or just ignore you, or whatever they do, because what you're saying to them is a threat to their egos and their ability to do their life and their job. I mean, when you wake up to whatever extent, it's really hard to go back to work or do the things that you were doing before. I've said this before, when you start reading the ingredients, your life becomes a lot more difficult. It's so much easier to believe in the system and just do what the system tells you to do. It's phenomenally better and more easy. You're not better in the sense for it's worse for you, but it's easier in the sense of your material life. Easier is often not better. But what I want to say here is when Aaron Rodgers wins the Super Bowl and he says, it wasn't that great. Like, it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. Like, whenever you do something and it's a disappointment, it's your wedding day and you think your wedding's going to be this incredible fairy tale-like event and things go south or whatever, or even if it is great, it doesn't make you feel the way that you thought it was going to make you feel. Any number of things are like that. You get the job, you get the money, you get this, you get that, you get something you thought you always wanted, you get the car you've always dreamed of having, something like this, right? And maybe it's great for a day or two, or there's something about it, but then you realize it's not as good as I had, I built it up to be. Oftentimes the anticipation of something is so much better than the actual experiencing of it. And so when Aaron Rodgers says that he wins the Super Bowl and it wasn't that great, like it was, what now? Like, what do I do now, right? Like, you have a goal, you finally accomplish that goal. But when I was talking about this with my wife as we were walking, it just occurred to me, like, think about all the other people that all they do is talk about football. All the people that have, they're lifelong fans, and they have, they're just obsessed with their team, and they go to all the games, they watch all the games, they do all the research, and they belong to, some sort of chat group, and, they listen to the media and Stephen A. Smith and these people, all these pundits, and they're obsessed with this thing. They're playing if they have fantasy football league and all this other shit, right? They bet on it, or all the stuff that football represents to them. They have all this gear, all the money they've invested. Like 10% of their income has gone to their being a fan of football or other, whatever it might be. And then they hear that the players themselves are like, yeah, when we won the Super Bowl, it wasn't as great as I thought it was going to be. Because it's all bullshit, right? Everything in our planet is illusionary because we have a soul. If you believe in a soul, then your soul is eternal. And so your soul lives as long as the universe exists. And it's, beyond trillions of years. It's beyond, any concept of time that we could ever have. And so your life here is a blip on that. Like even if you live thousands of years, which I believe is the case in previous, yugas and different types of humans that were here, even if you live thousands of years, it's still a fraction of your length of your soul. Even if you lived 1,000,000 years, it's still nothing. It's like a grain of sand on the entire time of an ocean, a beach full of sand, or a desert. A small grain of sand represents this life in the total span of your soul, right? Your soul is your true self. And so when they talk about Maya, the word Maya means illusion. I've talked about this in many videos in Sanskrit. This idea that we're living in a simulation, very much like a video game, where your soul is experiencing third dimensional reality that seems so real, but it's just a fraction of your eternal existence as a soul, and it's not what you are as a being. In essence, your energy. For lack of a better word, you're not physical substance. Like you're energetic in some way. You're, the essence of love, right? You're this, the causal body, and you have these subtle bodies which create a mind, a field for, thinking. The field for manus or mind. You have these different subtle bodies, your ego, your consciousness, chit, right? Your consciousness. And these subtle bodies create your fields for your things that are in your physical existence, but they're part of an energetic system. I use the analogy of the code behind what you're listening to. You can see what the code looks like. That's the true language, the true creator of this video that you're watching, right? The code is what you're seeing, or what you're hearing, and it's a replica of what I'm saying here, and it's changed into digital code, right? There's energy behind everything. There's soul life. There's spiritual energy behind everything in creation. There's code behind everything. And so all of this stuff is illusionary. And then there's the illusion within the illusion. You have this, money-based demonic illusion of our system. Demonic because it goes against the will of God, that purposely keeps you distracted, which most people in the truth community say that, but do you see it? Like it's all a distraction, right? And that's the idea of being, you can watch things, but just don't be attached to their outcomes, like in a deep way. Don't allow these things to create any impressions. See them and experience them like as the idea is God wants me to see this. God wants me to experience this. My soul wants me to see this or experience it, but that's all it is, right? Like that's the best way to proceed in your life. But if you dive into the illusion and you buy into the bullshit and the distractions, then you come up empty. And then when people are living a life where you see that your life is, a complete sham and fraud because you're buying into an illusion that's obviously an illusion, then those people become a threat to you and a threat to the illusion. And so even if they're barely scratching the surface of spiritual life, anything that's outside of the parameters and the boundaries that they've created, you become a threat to that. And that's why they react the way they do. And the problem with truthers and, the initial stages people go through as spiritual seekers, these are the same thing but also different things. As you awaken to something, there seems to be, a need in the beginning that you have to graduate from. Not seems to be. There is a need in the beginning where you still want validation from the beast and sheeple. You want them to recognize and applaud what you're doing, and that you want them to see you, and they can't see you. And it could be your family members, it could be society in general, but you want something from them that they can't give. You want some validation that you were right, and they're going to admit to you they were right, when the truth comes out. But they're never going to do that. They'll realize you were right, and they still won't give it up and say, yeah, you were right. They can't go there. They'll still find a way that it's your fault. Like it's crazy like that, but even though you told them, not to get the boop and all this shit, and they realize, oh my God, this thing is hurting me, they're not going to come back to you and go, you're right. I mean, maybe it's a few rare occasions. I shouldn't have gotten that, and you were right, and I wish I'd listened to you. They'll still blame you like it's fucked up, but they'll find some way it's still your fault because they can't confront the truth. They can't confront the lie. they can't admit that they're being lied to. Like, okay, they lied to me this time, but not the rest of the time. Or they lied to me a little bit, but not all the time. The basic system is good because they can't deal with the fact that the system that they're 100% dependent on is evil. Most people can't, in the truth community, can't deal with that either, right? Like, what does that mean? Does that mean I got to stop doing it? Because, like, what do you do then? You still have to participate. You still have to use money. You still have to pay taxes. You still have to do all the things that that you now know are bullshit, right? Like, you still have to do all the things that are part of the system. You have to obey the laws and the rules. And when you know it's bullshit, it makes it that much harder. Your shitty job that you have to go to, and you know it doesn't serve a purpose, and you're just contributing to the beast. But you still have to eat, right? So, like, it just makes it, like I said, that much harder. That's why people don't want to wake up. It's like that guy who wants to go back in the Matrix, the Cypher character, right? He wants to take the blue pill and go back because he wants to forget that he wants to just be, blissfully in the Matrix, right? Living a good life and being happy. Like, that's the majority of people who wake up a little bit, realize how much harder it is to be awake and alive and know that the system that you're 100% dependent on is bad for you. Like, it sucks. Like, there's no two ways about it. Like, that's a hard thing to live with. It's just going to make your life harder and harder. But it's, also, you don't have this feeling, like this niggling feeling, this irritation in your system that they're missing out on something and there's something off. Like, there's something wrong. Like, you're waking up and, because there's a disconnect. And part of you wants to know. Part of you knows, he already knows, and wants you to be aware and acknowledge what's going on a subconscious level, on a spiritual level. There's a severe price you pay for being in denial, right? And so, all of these things that I'm saying, and anybody who's aware of these things is a threat to society, because a system like this can't exist if people become aware of all these things. That's why I say all the time. Because, only the people who buy into the system are contributing to it in a real way. Like, if you're half, in and out, or you're riding the fence and you're only doing it because you're forced to, a system can't survive if everyone's aware that it sucks. You have to have true believers. Especially in a system like this, it's based in lies and illusion. If people don't believe in it, it collapses. And so when people have doubts about it, it collapses. And so, they have to keep that number to a minimum. It gets up to a certain amount of people in the system, there's no reversing it, right? People just see through it, and they see through the bullshit. And so, that's what this thing's all about, what I'm talking about with Aaron Rodgers and the rest of it. It's somebody who seeks an alternative explanation, and, they realize that the system itself, the beast, is lying to them. And then whatever explanation they get, and whatever, whether it's bullshit or not, or whether it's closer to the truth or whatever it is, that becomes a threat to the system. And then when you penetrate to higher levels of consciousness and you realize that there's a whole different purpose to your life and these things, you have these spiritual awakenings, well, then they got to kill you, right? That's, that's what's happened in the past. But now they know they don't, because no matter how much you talk about it, people are never going to get it. And so it's not my job or anybody's job to wake up the people who refuse to see what's so obviously there for them to see, because everybody could, and is willfully choosing not to. And I've learned that, it's not my problem, really. Like, it's my duty to say things, but it's, what they do with those things is up to them, right? In terms of how they deal with it, how they perceive it. And the majority of people just can't go there. And, even the people that go there are just on the starting path of their, the starting entry-level position in their spiritual journey. And their spiritual journey is far more vast than their material one. And so you can see how difficult that becomes, right? Where there's some now much harder thing that you have to embark on. And society and everyone else is telling you you're fucked in the head, right? And so let me play that meme, and then I'll show you the compilation, and then that'll be it. I'm not going to do the ending again. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Power Motto, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day, and be grateful.
I think you're all fucked in the head. It's science, and you shut up and wear your mask. It's science, and you shut up and wear your mask. It's science, and you shut up and wear your mask.
You shouldn't cut anti-vax people out of your life. They could be dead tomorrow. Spend time with them. Call them. Get in the will.
Screw your freedom.
The latest data that confirms that we're still in a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Continue to be among the unvaccinated, are among the unvaccinated, are unvaccinated. The unvaccinated, there are people who are dying and who will die who didn't have to. If you haven't gotten vaccinated, do it now. Do it now. It could save your life and it could save the lives of those you love. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. The unvaccinated overcrowd our hospitals, are overrunning emergency rooms and intensive care units, leaving no room for someone with a heart attack or pancreatitis or cancer. This is not about freedom or personal choice. It's about protecting yourself and those around you, the people you work with, the people you care about, the people you love. My job as president is to protect all Americans. My message to unvaccinated Americans is this: we've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal has cost all of us. As I speak to you, millions of Americans are still unvaccinated and unprotected. And because of that, their communities are at risk, their friends are at risk, the people that they care about are at risk. But if you're unvaccinated, you're not. And you're putting yourself, more importantly, maybe from your perspective, your family and your friends at risk. Ultimately, those who are not vaccinated will end up paying the price.
You are not allowed to infect anybody just because you think you've got rights that are delusional, of course. This delusional, evil idea, you got to identify those people and bring them out into the open so you know who they are. If you're willing to walk among us unvaccinated, you are an enemy.
At this point, staying unvaccinated is like wearing a Yankees hat to a Red Sox game. You're probably going to end up in the hospital, and it's your own damn fault.
I was so worked up over the weekend about this fucking Aaron Rodgers of the NFL. I don't even know where to begin with that story. I mean, this fucking guy, I don't watch football. Sorry, I'm not a big fan. I know the guy's a real good football player. That's why they put up with his bullshit. If I ran the NFL,
he's going to be a Hall.
You came across as a national embarrassment.
He's talking to Aaron Rodgers. You came across as a national embarrassment.
There is no other way around it. It was the most embarrassing performance of Aaron Rodgers' career.
Jeopardy and possibly putting your teammates in jeopardy, to me, is selfish.
I'd give Aaron Rodgers some advice. It would have been nice if he'd have just come to the Naval Academy and learned how to be honest.
Southern California, where as of yesterday, we started giving the vaccine to kids aged 5 and up. Finally, our kids will be able to go to...
Let's see.
Woo! Woo! Oh!
I'm not vaccinated.
Oh, where are you going?
Oh.
I take horse pills.
Yeah, we have to wait for them to be vaccinated because they are selfishly a endangerment to other people, including staff people here. So while we're all hopeful, and I join the president in being hopeful that we can reach a place where it is safe for people to be. What is this, the honor system? The honor system as to whether somebody's been vaccinated? Do you want them breathing in your face on the strength of their honor? So let's just see. Let's just see. I mean, again, this is about science and governance. And science and governance, we have a responsibility to make sure that the House of the Representatives chamber is not a petri dish because of the selfishness of some not to be vaccinated.
Teach people common sense. You need to get she doesn't even know what else to do to get the people of her state to get smart and listen to the facts and get vaccinated so people don't die. It's like that simple. Is it not the people who choose to remain unvaccinated right now who are causing all of this?
It is selfish at this point to not get vaccinated.
If you can be vaccinated and you refuse to, that's a selfish act. You're putting other people's lives and health at risk. You should get vaccinated.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
The new cases in COVID are because of unvaccinated folks. But it's time to start blaming the unvaccinated folks, not the regular folks. It's the unvaccinated folks that are letting us down.
The people who are not getting vaccines, who are believing the lies on the internet instead of science, it's time to start shaming them. What else? Or leave them behind. Because they are keeping the majority of Americans behind.
I think I just passed a house with a Halloween yard decoration that was a bunch of skeletons burning an anti-vaxxer at the stake. I'm gonna go.
And so there it is. It says anti-vaxxer right here. Took me a while to see this. That's why I'm pointing it out. And it's got a bunch of skeletons sitting around a campfire roasting a skeleton anti-vaxxer. This is supposed to be a fire, which is pretty effed up. Like, it's really effed up, right? And what my wife pointed out was, what did these guys die from?
Not that Halloween is a contest, but they want it.
It's the platforms like Facebook.
They're killing people. I mean, look, the only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated. And they're killing people.
What he's saying there is that posting words on social media is killing people. And they've made this like the worst thing. That you're a bad person for posting things that aren't verified by the official story. This is a guy who droned children. He ordered the deaths of children in Afghanistan when he ordered a drone strike on an imaginary enemy to distract from a failed war and a disastrous withdrawal. And so there are horrible things being done all the time. But now they've made posting things on social media one of the worst ones. But it ended up not being true, right? He demonized anti-vaxxers and people who were posting things on the internet, and ended up being him who was the liar and the person that was putting people in jeopardy.
Effects or reactions would be most common from these vaccines?
Well, generally, the most common reaction is what you see with most any other vaccine. A sore arm, a little bit aches, you might feel a little bit fatigued and down for 24 hours to 36 hours at the most. A small percentage of the people might get a fever that would last for 24 hours. You take a Tylenol, you can take care of that without much problem. The safety of severe adverse events is really very good. In the 30,000 people in the Moderna trial and the 44,000 people in the Pfizer trial, the one we're talking about today, there were really no severe adverse events.
They didn't list any side effects. I mean, that's, a sore arm or, these things. I mean, he's talking about just how you feel after you get the vaccine, not 2 months out or 3 years out or 5 years out. But now we know that there are multiple side effects, which I'll get into after we go through these things here. We know that there is admitted to side effects, things that they're investigating, and things that are related to people dying. And one of the ways we know that they were being deceptive and not saying what some of the side effects were, because they never showed you commercials that came from the pharmaceutical companies themselves. It was social influencers or media personalities or Jojo Magoo. It wasn't Pfizer posting commercials, because if they did that, they would have had to list all the side effects, which we still don't know what those are, right, in terms of what they discovered. And it's still being studied, right? It's not even like they're fully, it's fully been vetted by even the pharmaceutical companies themselves. So this was all lies, right? Again, they lied to people and said that this thing was safe and safer than getting COVID. And, this turned out to be not true, right?
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated. That it's to prevent severe disease, which we don't have data for that for kids. But I guess to me, the risk benefit calculation looks like this. If the vaccines are safe and the side effects are things like fatigue and headache and muscle soreness at the injection site, I would much rather deal with that for a day or not at all. I mean, most people actually have no side effects. And so I would much rather deal with side effects like that, but understanding that we're giving something that is safe and that can prevent the possibility of something horrible from happening, which is every parent's worst nightmare.
The question asked by the presenter was that because children really weren't dying from COVID, why give them a vax and risk any sort of side effects and things from the vax? And she, of course, said that there was no real side effects from the vax, which we now know is completely false, right? And we know that kids, there's something like 1,500 kids or less than that was the official statistics on the CDC died from COVID. Many of them had severe health issues going into the disease, right? So what she said here is, that she's saying, well, your worst nightmare is your kid's going to die. Again, putting the fear out there. There is a positive association with the word safe. Advertisers and presenters use the word safe to get people to buy their products. Safety is a big thing with people. And when they're scared of something like they were of COVID, and they were offered something that would keep them and their family safe, and they withheld information or out lied or, just made false claims with no scientific basis and saying this would keep you safe, then people went and got the vax. And now we know that things are different. And so all these lies and deceptions, and she had the nerve to say the unvaccinated can't be trusted, right? And so the other piece to this, which we now know, and both Bill Gates, I have the memes here, I've saved these things, and Fauci have both admitted that COVID wasn't beaten by the vaccine. The idea that the vaccine would give herd immunity and COVID would disappear because everyone would be vaccinated and they wouldn't get COVID because they had the vaccine, and then, it would just disappear because no one would have it and they couldn't pass it on to other people. This idea of herd immunity through vaccination. We now know that COVID mutated itself out of existence, or mutated itself into a more safer, more contagious form, and that everyone had ended up getting it anyway. So the vaccine turned out to be relatively unnecessary based in what these guys are saying here.
In beating COVID-19?
Well, sadly, the virus itself, particularly the variant called Omicron, is a type of vaccine. That is, it creates both B cell and T cell immunity, and it's done a better job of getting out to the world population than we have with vaccines.
I think what one referred to, what was not anticipated, was the extent of the mutations and the amino acid substitutions in Omicron, which is really unprecedented. It kind of came out of nowhere, where you have a virus that has 50 mutations, 30 of which are in the spike protein and 10 or 12 of which are in the receptor binding domain. The thing that's important is that it appears to be able to evade some of the immune protection of things like monoclonal antibodies, convalescent plasma, and the antibodies that are induced by vaccines. That's the sobering news against severe disease. But when you get to Omicron, the protection significantly goes down.
Keeping the events that are safe and also the events that have fun for people too. We can't be canceling everything, especially if we're going to be living with COVID for the foreseeable future. I would say that if you choose to go, make sure that you're vaccinated and boosted. Make sure that you're wearing a mask, even though it's outdoors. If there are lots of people packed around you, wearing a 3-ply surgical mask. Don't wear a cloth mask. Cloth masks are little more than facial decorations. There's no place for them in light of Omicron. And so wear a high-quality mask, at least a 3-ply surgical mask. And if you're going to be visiting elderly relatives.
Recently, when you said here on CNN that cloth masks were, quote, little more than facial decorations. So, in light of Omicron, what kind of mask should we all be wearing? And were you surprised by the pushback from your comments?
Well, I was surprised because this is not the first time that I or Professor Osterholm or really any of us public health experts have been saying that cloth masks are not appropriate for this pandemic. It's not appropriate for Omicron, it was not appropriate for Delta, Alpha, or any of the previous variants either, because we're dealing with something that's airborne. We're dealing with a virus that's extremely contagious. At the very beginning of the pandemic, we didn't know about masking. And then we didn't have enough masks, enough high quality masks for healthcare workers. And so we were trying to ration those. But then pretty quickly, we recognized that COVID is airborne.
Do you agree with the move?
I do. There was and is a time and place for pandemic restrictions, but when they were put in, it was always with the understanding that they would be removed as soon as we can. And in this case, circumstances have changed. Case counts are declining. Also, the science has changed, but rather that the responsibility should shift from a government mandate imposed from the state or the local district of the school. Rather, it should shift to an individual responsibility by the family, who can still decide that their child can wear a mask if needed.
Take New Jersey, the case in New Jersey, for instance, their new case average is just over 4,000. Is that an acceptable number to do this, or are they projecting out to March 7th at this point?
I don't think we should be looking at case counts at all at this point, especially when we're dealing with a milder variant and when so many people were exposed to Omicron and therefore have at least some level of protection either through vaccination or immunity. The key number that we should be looking at is hospitalizations. If our ICUs and hospitals in that particular region are not overwhelmed, if they're not over capacity, we can set a number, for example, 75% or 80% full, then we should be able to relax all restrictions. And I actually believe that we should be starting to, with the first restriction removed, should actually be the restriction on children. Because while for adults, you could say, well, what's the harm of adults masking when they go into a grocery store? There actually is a harm that we should be discussing of children continuing to mask. That doesn't mean that masking doesn't have its place for children when there are very high rates of hospitalization. If we get a new variant in the future that children are particularly susceptible to, we may want to bring masks back. But we should also be intellectually honest and say that masking has had a cost, especially for the youngest learners, people with English as a second language, children with learning disabilities. There has been a cost to them. So the risk-benefit calculation has really changed.
But she's had the flu for 14 days. Should she get a flu shot?
Well, no. If she got the flu for 14 days, she's as protected as anybody can be, because the best vaccination is to get infected yourself.
And so she should not get it?
If she really has the flu, she definitely doesn't need a flu vaccine. If she really has the flu,
she should not get it again.
No, she doesn't need it, because it's the most potent vaccination is getting infected yourself.
The current vaccines are not infection blocking. They're not broad, so when new variants come up, you lose protection. And they have very short duration, particularly in the people who matter, which are old people.
I knew these vaccines were not going to protect against infection, and I think we overplayed the vaccines, and it made people then worry that it's not going to protect against severe disease and hospitalization. It will, but let's be very clear. 50% of the people who died from the Omicron surge were older, vaccinated.
Was the Pfizer COVID vaccine tested on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market? If not, please say it clearly. If yes, are you willing to share the data with this committee? And I really want a straight answer, yes or no, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Regarding the question around, did we know about stop immunisation before it's entered the market? No. We had to really move at the speed of science to really understand what is taking place in the market.